first I want to thank for those of you who watched my first video. I actually was kind of surprised at how many people, you know, watched through, and I got a couple of compliments. So thanks to everyone for doing that. Kind of made my day. I hope everyone is staying safe and doing the best that they can while we are staying safe at home during COVID. So today I thought I would do, I'm sorry, my chair keeps squeaking. I thought I would do a galaxy. I know I talked about that in the last video, and I find galaxies to be relatively good practice for beginners also, and plus they're really kind of fun. And I was working on this one earlier, so I think I'm gonna do something similar to this. In the past I've done trees around here instead of buildings, but I think that trees can be hard for some people, especially when they're first starting out. So buildings I think are a little bit easier because you can just use a flat brush like this one and it mostly does the work for you. You know, you just kind of place things, you know, there's not a whole lot of technique involved in it. So hopefully something like that comes out. And so for my paints today, I've got my M-Gram dioxazine purple, Daniel Smith black, whoops, alizarin crimson, some rose madder, ultramarine blue from M-Gram, and then I also have some M-Gram gouache, and you can use any kind of gouache, it doesn't have to be M-Gram. And gouache is more opaque than watercolors, so I use it for the stars. Like in this one, if you use regular white watercolor, it really just kind of blends in with the rest of the painting and you can't really see the white. So that's why I'm using gouache. It's sort of an in-between of watercolor and acrylic paints. So that will be our last thing that we use. And then for my brushes, I have my Super Thirsty 20, my flat brush, and then I have the toothbrush for the very end when we do the stars. And then I also have a white gel pen that I like to use at the very end to sort of make some of the stars a little bit more visible or larger than they show up on the painting. And I've already taped my paper to the board, and today I'm using 300 pound paper. Again, don't feel like you need to use that kind of paper. You can use your student grade or your 140 pound 100% cotton, or your, you know, just your sketchbook. I've done a couple of these in a sketchbook as well, so you can see. I thought I had another one back there, but I guess not. That it works just as well doing it that way too. I just had this one piece of paper left that I wanted to use. Okay, so first we are going to wet the paper. And I love this Super Thirsty brush. And this is my Princeton Neptune 20. They hold a lot of water. And I'm gonna wet the entire paper. And I've got my paint already set out on my palette. And you don't have to do it that way. You can use it right out of a box palette if you want, or a, you know, one that already comes in its own palette. A lot of the student grade paints already come in their little boxes, which is kind of fun sometimes too. Okay, so I wet the whole thing. I'm just gonna tilt it to, I missed a spot up here. Again, you tilt it to the light so you can see the shine, and then you know which parts of the paper that you've wet and which ones you haven't. I think we're good. Now, for galaxies, you really can do pretty much whatever you want. For colors, you can use green and blues if you want. I'm partial to the blue, red, and purples. I think the next one I might try a green just because I haven't yet tried that. And you just pick your colors and just drop them in. There's, not a whole lot. It's kind of really hard to mess up doing a galaxy. I like to leave a white space or a couple of white spaces. Usually I do this standing up, but the camera couldn't get me standing, so I'm sitting, and I actually find it a lot easier to do when I'm standing. And I like to do just sort of tilting a little bit. I'll do this over here and leave a couple of white spaces. Now the trick is, for me, the hardest part is getting it to be dark enough, actually. So a lot of times what you have to do is wait for it to dry a bunch of times and just keep layering over and over. All right, so that's enough blue, I think. I'm gonna add some of this red, which ends up being sort of purpley too, but not as dark as the purple I'm going to use in a little while. So I'm just gonna kind of spread that around. And connect some of those. I think I'm actually gonna make that smaller. All right, now I'm gonna add my purple, which is usually super dark. And I want the corners and the edges to be really dark here. Now what I'm going to do is actually take some tissue and mop it up. I don't know what it is about this look, but I really like, I don't know if it just gets too moist at some point, but I really like just kind of mopping up some of it with tissue, not paper towel, because paper towel leaves, I find it leaves sort of funny marks sometimes that tissues don't. Okay, so now let's just get that out of the way so I don't stick it in my hand. See, now I know that we're not nearly as dark as I want to be, so I'm gonna just mix up some black and purple. A little experiment. There we go, that's a little bit darker. See, now that I've like mopped up some of that water, it should show a little bit darker. I could just let it dry and do another layer, but I don't want to have to stop the video and then restart it a bunch of times. So now I'm just gonna kind of, and I usually only use a little bit of that red, and again, it dries, watercolor dries lighter. Just gonna add a little bit. Just see what happens if I do that. And we're just kind of merging these together. mixing, matching, kind of do whatever you want, see what happens. It's the most fun about doing galaxies, I feel like. You can really do anything. And as this dries, all of my brush marks should sort of blend in. All right, now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna mop up again, and then I'm gonna add some black. And this looked too, like, cause galaxies are light in some places and dark in others. It just kind of adds to the effect a little bit, I find. All right, we'll see. It might still be too wet. I may have to pause, but give this a shot. Let's see what happens. There we go. I'm gonna do black. Again, I like my edges and my corners to be kind of dark. And then what I'll do is I'll stick maybe some right through here. And then up to here. I'm just sort of weaving my brush along. And the black just sort of melts in with the purple, which is a really nice effect. There, now we're starting to look like a cool galaxy. I think I'm gonna add a little bit more black to my palette. Some of my paints I've found are, I've had them for a really long time, and I store them in my downstairs where it's like a half underground, like a finished basement sort of, and it gets super cold down here in the winter, and I find that my paints get kind of gunky, like this black right here is not really doing what I want it to do. Wow, that's interesting. Try it that way. And this is one of the differences using a 300-pound paper also than a 140. The paint sort of melts in with the other paints easier than it does on lighter paper or paper that's not 100% cotton. I know I keep mentioning paper. I personally think that paper is very important. I recently went on last summer I went on a little instruction. It was a one-on-one instruction that I had with a fellow artist in Waldoboro or Damariscotta. She lives in Damariscotta, and she showed me the huge differences between, you know, using the paper. And at first I was like, oh, she's such a paper snob, and why should I have to do that? And then I started working with the heavier paper and realized that she actually was making very good points. So, okay, I'm gonna stop with this right now because it might be getting too dark. And so if you guys are interested in any other lessons, I can certainly try and see what I can come up with to show you the differences in the paper weights and the different kinds of papers and stuff like that. if you guys are interested. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna let this dry and we'll see what happens. So I'll be back. All right, now we're back. And now that I've had a chance to kind of look at my painting, I think before I had it this way, and I sort of didn't like the way it came out. So I'm flipping it this way because what I can see is that when I add the buildings, I kind of want to take this pattern right here and use this for the buildings. And I'm not totally sold on this like uniformity of a circle up here. So what I'm gonna try and do is just sort of fix that a little bit. And all I'm gonna do really is just add some blue, if I can get all the black off my brush. That's why I keep a clean jar also next to my regular jar. So I'm just gonna kind of just make it a little bit less uniform, circle-y, so it doesn't look quite. And I know it looks kind of silly right now, but when it dries, it should dry okay. Just gonna add it down there too. Just make it, just so it's not quite so much of a circle. Well, we'll have to check it out when it dries also. So now what I'm going to do, the bottom part is pretty much, I think it's dry so that when we add the buildings, they won't, they might spread, the paint might kind of spread out a little bit, but I think it might actually look okay if it ends up being that way. So I'm taking my flat brush now and I'm using black. And I'm just sopping up as much black. Now I want the smaller buildings to be on this side and then larger buildings up here. So I'm just gonna kind of play it by ear. And again, the flat brush sometimes works really well because you can just shape buildings however you want. And you can use the flat edge. And I like adding, you know, towers, and you can do any shapes that you want. They don't have to be square. You can do triangle ones like downhill. And then just, you know, you can pretty much add whatever you want for buildings. And you can go back and sort of add however you leave spaces in between them if you want. Make some thinner, some smaller. I'm just gonna add, I'm trying not to get in the way of the camera here, so it's a little. Those. Maybe I'll add a rectangle right there. And sometimes even if you want to just start with a strip across the bottom and then see where that takes you after, you can do that. Like I know I kind of want, let's see, maybe I want there to be a taller one on this side. And then skinny one. Maybe I want a super tall one right here. We'll just do a, I think I want there to be something bigger up here. There, that does look a little bit too uniform, so. I don't like things that look super uniform all the time. Let's just add a little. All right, now, in the other painting, I added the stars before, oh, here comes Roman. I added the stars before painting the buildings, and it didn't come out that great because the black still didn't cover the stars, so some of the buildings were still white. Let's see if I can do this without Roman, go on. So you can see here, like, some of this white is still on the black, and that just goes to show how opaque the gouache can be. I could go over it with a bunch more coats and it would probably fix the issue, but it's just easier sometimes to do it this way. All right, let's pause while we, sorry, Roman. He'll probably find his way back in. Sorry about that. little guest star to our, oh, he's coming back. My door doesn't latch all the way. It blocks. I gotta block it. Come here. All right, now I've put something in front of it, so hopefully I can keep him out just for a little bit longer. All right, so I'm just gonna go over this black, and as the black dries, it dries lighter also. So sometimes you kind of have to keep going over until it's as dark as you want it to be. I didn't want that to be quite that tall. Let's just fix that. There. I'm just making minor adjustments here. Maybe a different one right there. Just to make it look like some are in the distance and some aren't. There, I think that's enough for right now. A little bit of a, there. Okay, so the buildings are done. And this top part, I think, is probably still a little bit wet, but what I want to do is just sort of fix some of those edges. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go in and with my brush and try and, so this is a way you can mess up a galaxy, is if you wet something that's already been dry, it does these little bloom effects, which is kind of what's going on here. So what I could do is go back in with the black, because see how light that turned out to be pretty light now too. But I'm afraid that I will mess this up if I do that. So what I'm gonna do is wait a little bit for it to dry, because it's still quite wet. And then we will put the stars in, and that should hopefully sort of detract from some of the mistakes that we made here. I'm just doing this again to sort of blend in. It might actually end up looking okay. And this is one good thing too also about the heavier paper, is that it is slightly easier to fix a mistake, which is very difficult to do in watercolor, but sometimes with this paper it's a little bit easier. I can just mop up the extra water so that it doesn't have that blooming effect. And it's sort of merging in kind of nice right now, so maybe I'll just... All right, so I'm just gonna leave it like that for right now, and then we'll come back when it's dry. Okay, now we're dry. So now what we're gonna do is add the stars, which is the messiest part. It's also super fun. So I'm taking my toothbrush, and I just want to spray down my gouache because gouache dries. Whoops. Oh, look, I got my black and my white with my gouache. Gouache dries faster than watercolor does. It also dries matte, so it's not shiny like oil paints, but it dries flat, almost like acrylics. So I'm taking my toothbrush and I'm just gonna wet it a little bit, and I'm just kind of getting, you know, all the whole surface of the toothbrush wet. And then I'm gonna dab it once, because sometimes if there's too much water, it like drops on there and then spoils, it can spoil the whole painting. And then I'm gonna try not to get the buildings, and I'm just gonna kind of take my thumb and rub it across the top just to splatter. Well, I got some on the buildings, but that's okay, whatever. Again, messiest part. All right, and then that's all I want for that. Well, maybe I'll try and put a little bit down there. I guess it doesn't matter if it gets on the buildings. And again, this sort of isn't dark enough for my liking. If I could go another layer, I would, but I think it's still, you know, it still came out pretty good. It's really hard to tell how dark something is going to come out, because this painting on different paper could have come out much darker than it has on this 300-pound paper. And gouache is a little bit harder to wash off your hands. my hands are full of white paint right now. So there's the stars are all done. I'm going to take off the tape to do the big final reveal on here, just because they always look so nice when you take the tape off. All right, that's the final one there. And that is the final painting. And what you can do also is take your gel pen and just kind of do a couple of big, like, sort of just do a couple stars, like bigger stars. And again, you definitely don't have to do this. I just find it kind of adds a little extra touch. So now this is an example of a watercolor that, you know, sort of came out good. I mean, a lot of times, you know, you can take a glimpse of your painting and be like, oh, that didn't come out quite as good as I wanted, or it came out better than I wanted. And I also recommend doing the same thing more than once, because, you know, it's never going to come out the same way twice. Like in this one, I used a slightly different brush technique where I was kind of sweeping everything from the right to the left side. And this one, I just sort of swirled it around, and I like the way this one came out better than this one, but I like the way these buildings look better than this one. So it really depends on, you know, it depends on you, and practice always makes perfect, you know, well, practice makes you better, because artists, we never think we're perfect or that our artwork is perfect. So try the same thing over and over again until you find, you know, the one that you like the best. And then you can take these techniques, like next time I'll use this sky technique and this building technique, and maybe I'll come out, maybe the third time I do the painting, it will come out exactly the way I want. So that is our lesson for today, and I hope you guys liked it. And if you want to see more, let the library know, or send emails or comments or whatever, and let me know what you guys would like to see. Thank you very much, and stay safe, everyone.